My name is Naomi Powell. I'm 39 years old and I live in Denver, Colorado. Before I tell you what happened, I want to say this first. Thank you. Thank you for taking a few minutes out of your life to listen to my story. Because this isn't just about me. It's about what happens when love, money, and family loyalty collide, and you're forced to choose only one. The story I'm telling you today happened in July 2024. That summer, my son Dylan was 8 years old. Dylan lost his father 2 years earlier. Some losses scream, others whisper. My husband's death was the kind that hollowed our house out without breaking a single window. Since then, Dylan and I had become our own tiny universe, two people orbiting each other, trying not to fall apart. I worked as a software engineer for a tech company based in Denver. It paid the bills. It kept our lives stable. But that Saturday morning, stability cracked. At 7:30 a.m., I got the message I was dreading. An emergency meeting, mandatory attendance, partners flying in from Seattle, no exceptions. The meeting was scheduled from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. I stared at my phone, then at Dylan, who was sitting on the living room floor, completely absorbed in his remote control car, a red monster truck, big tires, scratches on the side. I'd bought it for his birthday 2 months earlier. Since then, it barely left his hands. My babysitter was out of town. My neighbors had plans. Every option I ran through my head collapsed. Then Dylan looked up at me. "Mom," he said carefully, like he already knew the answer mattered. "Can I go to Grandpa's house today?" The question caught me off guard. Dylan didn't usually ask that. But then I remembered. Weeks earlier, my father had promised to teach him how to fix bicycles. Dylan had talked about it for days. I hesitated. "Are you sure?" I asked gently. "You could come to the office with me, sit in the break room." Dylan shook his head immediately, eyes bright. "He promised. He said today." Something inside me softened. Maybe this would be good for him. Maybe I was overthinking. I called my father, Robert Powell. He answered on the third ring, cheerful, almost eager. He said he was home, said it was no problem, said Dylan could stay as long as needed. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. That should have warned me. Dylan rushed to his room, came back with his backpack. I noticed the shape inside instantly. The monster truck. I almost told him to leave it behind. Almost. But I didn't. My father's house was about 20 minutes away, long enough for old memories to crawl back in. My dad was 68 that year, widowed for over a decade. He lived alone in the same house we grew up in. He believed in discipline, in obedience, in lessons. At the time, I told myself he was just old school. When I pulled into the driveway, the front door opened before I rang the bell. Dad stood there, hands stained with motor oil. Familiar, solid. Behind him, another child ran past the living room. Tyler, my brother Daniel's son. Dad explained Daniel had dropped him off earlier. Business meeting, contracts, weekend work. The boys spotted each other instantly. Laughter exploded across the yard. Dylan looked happy, truly happy. Before I left, I crouched down and took his face in my hands. "If anything feels wrong," I told him softly, "you call me. Immediately." He nodded. "I know, Mom." Dad patted my shoulder. "I've got this," he said. "Go do your meeting." I believed him. That was my mistake. The meeting dragged on. Coffee went cold. Slides blurred together. At 11:07 a.m., my phone vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times. Dylan's smartwatch. My heart dropped. I stepped into the hallway and answered. What I heard on the other end shattered me. "Mom," Dylan sobbed, his voice breaking apart. "Please come get me. I don't want to stay here anymore." I pressed my hand against the wall to stay upright. "Baby, tell me what happened." Through tears, he explained. The car. Tyler wanting it. Grandpa demanding he hand it over. "I said no," Dylan cried. "It was my birthday gift." Then his voice collapsed. "He took it, Mom. He threw it in the trash." Something inside me went completely cold. I left the meeting without waiting for permission. I drove faster than I ever had. And with every mile, one truth grew heavier in my chest. I had sent my son into the same house that once taught me fear. And this time, he was the one paying the price. The drive back to my father's house felt like a tunnel with no exit. My hands were locked around the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned pale. Every red light felt personal. Every slow driver felt like an enemy. I kept hearing Dylan's voice in my head, shaky, choked, terrified. "He threw it in the trash, Mom." It wasn't about a toy. Not really. It was about what that act meant. A grown man deciding he could crush a child's sense of safety just to prove he was in control. When I pulled up in front of Dad's house, I barely parked straight. I was out of the car before the engine fully died. The front door was unlocked. That alone made me angrier, like he wasn't even worried about what he'd done, like nothing was wrong. I shoved the door open, and there he was. Dylan sat on the far end of the couch, curled into himself like he was trying to fold his body small enough to disappear. His cheeks were blotchy, his eyes were red, his hands were clenched into fists on his knees. Tyler stood a few feet away, stiff and nervous, glancing between me and my father like he'd stepped into a storm and didn't know where to run. And my father, Robert Powell, was sitting in his old armchair, calm, quiet, like this was just another Saturday. The moment Dylan saw me, he launched off the couch and ran straight into my arms. He clung to me so hard I felt his whole body shaking. "Mom!" he cried into my shirt. I held him tighter than I ever had before, like I could physically shield him from the world by wrapping my arms around him. Then I forced myself to breathe. Slow, controlled, because if I exploded right then, Dylan would carry that memory too. I pulled back just enough to look at him. "Baby," I said softly, wiping his wet cheeks with my thumb, "go sit on the porch for a minute. I need to talk to Grandpa." Dylan's eyes widened, like he didn't want to leave me even for a second. I leaned closer. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, reluctant, trembling, and slowly walked outside. Then I turned to Tyler. My anger didn't belong to him. He was a child who wanted something shiny, a child who hadn't learned yet where the lines were supposed to be. "Tyler," I said gently, keeping my voice low, "can you go into the back room and close the door for a minute? I need to talk to Grandpa privately." Tyler looked at Dad like he was asking permission. Dad nodded once, barely looking at him. The boy disappeared into the hallway. Now it was just my father and me. The silence was so thick it felt like the air had weight. I stood in front of him, my chest rising and falling like I'd been running, because I had been, in every way. Dad looked up at me, brows slightly raised, like I was the one who had interrupted something important. I spoke first. "Explain it." Dad's face barely changed. "Explain what?" The way he said it, smooth, casual, sent a flash of heat up my neck. "You threw my son's toy in the trash," I said slowly, each word sharpened by restraint. "You made him cry so hard he couldn't breathe. Explain why." Dad leaned back in the chair like he was settling into a lecture. "I was teaching him a lesson," he said. "Kids need to learn to share, especially family." Family. That word always sounded like a weapon in his mouth. I stepped closer. Sharing is not forcing a child to hand over his birthday gift because someone else demanded it. Dad's eyes narrowed. "You're raising him soft." My throat tightened. "Soft?" I repeated. "He's 8. He's already lost his father. You think the right move is to humiliate him?" Dad stood up, slowly. And suddenly I was 8 again too, standing in this same room, trying not to cry, trying not to shake, waiting for the next punishment. "I raised you," he said, voice turning hard. "And you turned out fine." I let out a bitter laugh that didn't sound like me. "No," I said. "I turned out quiet. There's a difference." His jaw clenched. "You think you're going to tell me how to discipline a child?" he snapped. "I disciplined you and Daniel the same way. If you wouldn't share, I threw things out, and you survived." That exact sentence, it opened a door in my head I kept locked for decades. Flashbacks hit like lightning. My favorite doll, gone. A book I loved, ripped. Me crying, begging, promising to be good, while Dad stood over me, unmoved. I swallowed hard, forcing myself back into the room. "I didn't survive," I said, voice shaking now. Not from fear, but from the truth. "I adapted. I learned to hide. I learned to shut my mouth. I learned to pretend everything was fine because you didn't allow anything else." Dad stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then he scoffed. "So now you're blaming me for your feelings?" "Feelings," my voice cracked. "That's what you think this is? Feelings?" Dylan called me terrified. Terrified. Do you know what that does to a child? Dad stepped toward me. "Tyler is my grandson too. Are you saying Dylan is more important?" The audacity of it made my breath hitch. "Yes," I said immediately. "Right now he is, because Tyler still has both his parents. Dylan only has me." Dad's face hardened, as if compassion was an insult. "So you want special treatment?" "No," I said, voice lower now, dangerous. "I want basic human decency." Dad shook his head like I was hopeless. "You're overreacting. This is why kids grow up selfish." I could feel it then, something shifting inside me. This wasn't just about today. This was about a lifetime of swallowing things and calling it respect. I took a deep breath. "I want you to apologize to Dylan." The words landed like a slap. Dad blinked once, then his face flushed red. "Apologize?" he repeated loud now. "To a child?" "Yes," I said, unwavering. "You were wrong." Dad's lip curled in disgust. "I'm his grandfather." "And he's my son," I snapped, the calm finally breaking. You don't get to hurt him and call it love. Dad moved closer, eyes sharp, voice rising. If you're going to be this stubborn, he barked, then don't ever bring Dylan here again. The moment those words left his mouth, I felt something strange. Not panic, not fear. Relief, like a chain was finally being cut instead of tightened. I stared at him for a long second. Then I nodded slowly. If that's what you want, I said. Fine. Dad looked like he expected me to beg. I didn't. I turned and walked to the porch. Dylan was sitting on the step, shoulders hunched, trying to wipe his face without anyone seeing. I knelt in front of him and held his hands. We're leaving, I said gently. Dylan's eyes searched mine like he needed to know if I meant it. You're not mad at me? He whispered. That question cracked my heart open. I pulled him into my chest and kissed his forehead. I am never going to be mad at you for protecting what's yours, I said. Never. His small arms wrapped around me. And in that moment, I made a promise. Not the kind you say out loud to sound brave. The kind you make with your whole soul. I would not let my son grow up learning fear is love. We walked down the steps together, hand in hand. I didn't look back at my father. Not once. Because I already knew. Even if he never apologized. Even if he never changed. I was done letting him teach my child the same pain he taught me. The toy store lights were too bright. That was the first thing I noticed as Dylan and I stepped inside. How everything felt aggressively cheerful compared to the storm still raging inside my chest. Shelves lined with color, plastic smiles on cardboard boxes, the sound of other kids laughing somewhere down the aisle. Dylan stood frozen near the entrance. He didn't ask for anything, didn't pull my hand, didn't even move. That broke me more than his crying had. I crouched down in front of him. Hey, I said softly, you see anything you like? He hesitated. But my other car... I know, I said, cutting him off gently. That one mattered. And what happened wasn't okay. But today, I want you to choose something just for you. He searched my face like he was making sure this wasn't a trick. Then, slowly, his eyes drifted to a blue racing car with LED lights glowing along the sides. That one? I asked. He nodded. When I paid and handed him the box, he hugged it to his chest like it was fragile glass. The smile that spread across his face didn't erase what happened, but it reminded me why I made the choice I did. We went home. Dylan raced the car across the living room floor, laughter finally replacing the silence. I sat on the couch, watching him, trying to breathe again. That peace lasted exactly 42 minutes. My phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. Dad, Daniel, Dad. I turned the ringer off and placed the phone face down on the table. I wasn't ready. Around 5 in the afternoon, as I was chopping vegetables for dinner, the doorbell rang. Once. Firm. I froze. I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, Daniel Powell stood on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes already judging. He came alone. No Tyler. I didn't step aside. What do you want? I asked. Daniel glanced past me into the house. You're not even going to invite me in? No, I said calmly. We can talk here. That annoyed him. Good. He exhaled sharply. You were completely out of line today. I stared at him. You came all this way to tell me that? Dad was disciplining his grandson, he snapped. You had no right to interfere. My grip tightened on the doorframe. He threw my son's toy in the trash, I said. My son called me crying. Daniel rolled his eyes. Dylan needs to learn to share. Dad did what he had to do. Something snapped inside me, but not loudly. Quietly. Dangerously. So let me ask you something, I said. If Dad demanded Tyler hand over his favorite toy to Dylan and Tyler refused, and Dad threw Tyler's toy away, would you still be standing here defending him? Daniel hesitated, just for a second. Then he scoffed. That's different. I tilted my head. Different how? He didn't answer. Instead, he sighed like I was exhausting him. Look, Naomi, Dad is furious. You embarrassed him. You need to call him and apologize. The word apologize echoed in my ears. I apologize, I repeated slowly. For protecting my child? Yes, Daniel said firmly. Dad's the adult. He has authority. You don't get to challenge that. There it was. Not concern, not empathy. Obedience. I finally understood why Daniel was here. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was here to make sure I stayed in my place. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. Dad said if you don't apologize and bring Dylan back this weekend, he's cutting you out of the will. I felt my stomach drop, but only for a moment. Daniel continued, almost smug now. $400,000, Naomi, not counting the house. The business. You really want to throw that away over a toy car? $400,000. College, security, a future. And then, clear as glass, I saw Dylan's face when he asked me if I was mad at him. I looked Daniel straight in the eyes. Go tell Dad I don't want his money. Daniel blinked. What? I don't want the inheritance, I said, steady and loud enough for him to hear every word. Not if it costs my son his dignity. Daniel laughed, short, disbelieving. You're insane. You'll regret this. No, I said quietly. The only thing I regret is thinking this family would protect my child. Daniel's expression hardened. Don't come crawling back when you need help. I won't. He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away. I watched his car disappear down the street. Then I closed the door. Inside, Dylan was on the floor, guiding his new car carefully around the couch, completely unaware that, without knowing it, he'd just become the reason I finally stopped being afraid. And for the first time in my life, choosing him didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like freedom. A week passed. No calls, no messages, no apologies. The silence felt intentional, like a countdown. On the 7th day, my phone rang. Dad? I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering. Part of me still hoped, quietly, foolishly, that this would be the call where he finally said the words he'd never said in my entire life. I was wrong, I answered. Naomi, my father said. His voice was cold, clipped. I gave you time to think. Are you done thinking? Yes, I replied. A pause, then sharper. And? There's nothing to reconsider, I said calmly. I won't bring Dylan back unless you apologize to him. He laughed. Not a warm laugh, not even an angry one. A mocking laugh. You're spoiling him, Dad said, turning him into a selfish child. I was helping you, and you turned against me. I closed my eyes. This was the same man who had never once asked how I felt when my husband died. The same man who believed love only mattered if it came with obedience. I'm not asking you to agree with me, I said quietly. I'm asking you not to hurt my son. There was a beat of silence. Then his voice dropped, heavy with authority. I will never apologize to a child. I let that sink in. I figured, I said. That seemed to enrage him more than yelling ever could. If you insist on challenging me, he said slowly, then you're no longer my daughter. I'll remove you from my will, from this family. There it was, the final card. 2 years ago, that threat would have crushed me. I would have panicked, cried, apologized just to make the tension stop. But something had changed. I pictured Dylan sleeping peacefully in his room, safe, unafraid. And suddenly the fear was gone. If that's your decision, I said steadily, I respect it. Silence. Pure, stunned silence. Then the call ended. He didn't even say goodbye. I placed the phone on the table and stood by the window, watching the sun sink into the evening sky. The orange light spilled across the floor like a quiet ending. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt unburdened. A month later, a letter arrived from my father's lawyer. Formal, precise, final. I had been officially removed from the will. All assets, savings, house, business, transferred to Daniel. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. And that was it. No breakdown, no regret, no second guessing. Because in exchange, my son slept through the night. Because he laughed freely. Because he never once asked me if Grandpa was mad at him. And that was worth more than any inheritance. 2 years have passed since that Saturday. Dylan is 10 now. He's taller, louder, braver in ways that still catch me off guard. He rides his bike to the end of the block and back like it's a victory lap. He sleeps with his door cracked open, not because he's afraid, but because he likes knowing I'm close. Our life didn't fall apart after I was cut off. It went on. I still work. I still cook dinner most nights. We still argue about bedtime and homework and whether cereal counts as dinner. Our house isn't big and our life isn't flashy, but it's calm. And calm, I've learned, is priceless. Dylan doesn't talk about his grandfather anymore. Not because he forgot, but because children move forward when they feel safe enough to. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I ever wonder what would have happened if I'd just apologized, if I'd swallowed my pride, if I'd chosen the money. Here's the truth. That money came with a price. The price was teaching my son that love is conditional, that adults are always right, even when they hurt you, that his feelings matter less than someone else's authority. I couldn't pay that price. Family isn't about blood alone. It's about who protects you when you're small, who believes you when you're scared, who doesn't ask you to suffer quietly to keep the peace. Walking away didn't make me heartless. It made me a mother. If you're listening to this and you're standing at a similar crossroads, between money and safety, between tradition and your child's well-being, here's what I want you to know. Money can be rebuilt. Trust, once broken, reshapes a child forever. Choosing your child doesn't make you selfish. It makes you brave. And one day, when your child looks back on their life, they won't remember what you inherited. They'll remember that you stood up for them, even when it cost you everything. So let me ask you, if it were you, Would you choose the inheritance? Or would you choose your child? Thank you for listening to my story.